The answer is yes. There it says we're started, and so welcome everybody. So glad that you are here for this webinar. Chances are you know what it's for because you signed up for it. We're going to talk about the Flexible Leaders Playbook, leading more effectively in every situation. That's what we're here to talk about, man. Hello, David. So I'm super excited that you're here, and I don't know who everyone is. I certainly know some of the names of folks who are here, but as a designer of this session, I always have to think about who is my audience, and so I believe that my audience is somebody somewhere in. I'm gonna ask you to turn off your video. I got it. That you have one of these kinds of roles, right? Maybe you're a senior leader in your organization. Maybe you're a business owner. Maybe you're an individual contributor. You're somewhere in the middle. I don't know who you are exactly. And you could have one or more of these roles, wear one or more of these hats. Maybe you're here thinking about this organizationally, but I'm hoping that at a minimum, you're also thinking about this for yourself as a leader. In fact, even if you came thinking about this organizationally, I believe that you'll get a great deal out of this if you think about it for yourself too. Regardless of what your role is, here's what I believe to be true. And it's based on this premise that I created this session for us, that you care about the success of your organization. You know that leadership skills help make that happen, right? So it's from that frame, it's with that assumption, if you will, that I've created this session for you this afternoon. And yes, I did create it for this group. So if you don't know me, I will share you a little bit about me. Some of you know me well, but for those of you that don't, my name is Kevin Eikenberry. I will be your leader for the next 57 minutes. And why me? I would say that probably the most important thing to know is not all those lists of books at the top. It's not many of the other things on that list. What all of that stuff tells you is that I've been thinking about and working on leadership for a long time. And we get the chance to work with leaders from around the world. But perhaps the most important thing is that I'm doing what you're doing every day, leading a team. And some of those team members are on this call. And so hopefully what I bring to you today is a perspective that you don't have, and yet some commonality with you in terms of the work that we do, even though the team that you lead might do quite different work than ours. And the mission of your organization might be quite different than ours. That at the end of the day, we have a lot in common as leaders. And so it's from all of that perspective that I'm bringing this to you today, and super excited to do that. There are some nice things that people have said about me over time. I'll leave that up there for just a second. And I'll simply say this: if you are arriving now and you don't have the chat window open that up, because we'll be using that throughout to give you a chance to interact with me. I'll be asking questions that mostly will come from there. If you have a question or a comment, you can ask it in the chat. I'm monitoring it, and members of my team are checking it, watching it as well. So, you might say, well, why would we do this now? Why do we need to be thinking about building a playbook for leaders now? Well, I'm guessing that you are with me in realizing that the world is changing pretty rapidly, and there's lots of uncertainty on all sorts of levels. And so it's when things are uncertain, when things are changing, we need to be able to see, what do we need to be working on? What could we do? How can we have a playbook to help us deal with that uncertainty and give us some confidence that we can be more successful, whatever the situation tells us. Now, that's sort of why now, and sort of why the early spring or late winter of 2025. But why today? Well, if you didn't know, in a few weeks, my brand new book, Flexible Leadership, will come out. And so there's no question that one of the reasons that we're doing this is to share with you some ideas from this book, framed around the idea of a playbook. And so that gives you the context for where we're headed. Where are we headed specifically? These are the bullet points that you saw when you signed up and joined us, right? We're going to talk about the pitfalls of being an inflexible leader and how we can avoid them. That alone, I think, might be worth the time for coming. We're going to assess and respond to different leadership situations with confidence you'll be able to do that. When you leave, you'll be able to create a playbook of flexible leadership practices or plays, if you will, that you can implement in your daily work. And it will help you think about how to use this kind of a playbook across your organization as well. So again, as I put these slides together, I got more and more excited about sharing this with you. And maybe this first part is as important as any of it. So let's talk about some pitfalls, shall we? I've got 3 kinds of pitfalls for us. They are habit, some thoughts about consistency, in fact, maybe over believing in consistency, stability, etc. And then we're going to talk about reasoning skills, which is probably not what you expected when you showed up for this session. So I'm going to talk about each of these pitfalls a bit. And as we talk about them, I want you to be thinking about which ones of these do you fall into, and don't feel bad if you do, because I think they happen to all of us at least a little bit some of the time. So here we go. Here's the first one, habits. The pitfalls start with habits. Have you ever said any of these things? Well, this is how I lead. This is my style. This is my approach. This is how I've always done it. This is how it works for me. And so when we say these things, or when we think these things, there's a couple of things going on. Number one is we've started to identify with practices and said they are ours, which is fine to a point. Like, here's the thing about habits. Habits are great when they're helpful habits, right? But we all have habits that are helpful. We probably all have habits, if we're honest with ourselves. I'm not going to ask you to tell me that are maybe less than helpful. And I would suggest to you that these statements aren't always helpful. To say that this is my leadership style, because what follows that statement? And so this is how I do it. You're just going to have to put up with me because this is how I do it. All of these 4 things can be about identity, which could be worth our time, but they're also about habit. And the reason they're about habit is all 4 of these things lead us to our automatic responses. They lead us to say, well, this is how I do it, and so this is what I'm going to do. We're not flexing, we're not adjusting, we're just automatically responding to the stimulus in front of us. And so I would suggest to you that it's a pitfall for us as leaders to lean too much into our habits, because unexamined habits can keep us from improving. Now, again, I'll admit that all of us, probably everyone who's here, has habits that are helping you, which is fantastic. I'm also suggesting that we may have some that aren't helping us. And if we're not willing to step back and look at them and just lean into our natural responses, we don't need a playbook, because we already have an intuitive one we're using, which might not always be serving us best. Right. So pitfall number 1 is habit. And I've actually hinted that perhaps there's a little bit of problem, perhaps some challenges with the way we view our identity as well. But pitfall number 1 can be habit. Pitfall number 2 relates to this question. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put the next slide up, and it's yes or no. And so just give me your answer in the chat, yes or no. Here we go. Should leaders be consistent? Just give me a yes or no in the chat. We'll do a very informal and quick sort of look at that. And we're getting lots and lots of yeses. Yeses, yeses, yeses. Laura says yes, but that yes also be flexible. I got a couple of depends. I got a sometimes. I got a yes with flexibility. I've got yeses with the depends. I got a yes and no, but man, we got an awful lot of yeses. So I want you to imagine this picture. You're looking at this big, beautiful, stable, sturdy, consistent oak tree. And we would say, man, that is a picture of stability. That's a picture of consistency. That's a picture of strong. And we would say, man, that's what I want to be as a leader, right? And yet, look at that tree. It is certainly consistent and stable and strong. But isn't it also flexible? Imagine if I hit a button now and turned on the video for this picture, where the leaves, that would have been a good idea, by the way, where the leaves begin to move and blow and the branches begin to adjust and flex and are pliant in the wind. You see, this is a picture that we think of as being about something that's consistent, and yet it's also a picture of something that is flexible. See, I asked you a question which fundamentally asked you to answer, should we be consistent or something else, consistent or flexible? And a few of you added the word flexible or said it depends. And I'm suggesting to you that the more effective answer for us is that we be both consistent and flexible. And we need a playbook because of the word and here. Right. So let's go back to our tree. I'm not going to go back in the slide because you can see a picture of a tree in your head. The tree is definitely consistent. Why? Because of its roots, which keep it firmly rooted. So if we want to be like a tree, what are the things that root us as leaders? Well, those would be our values and our principles and our mission and the why and the purpose for our organization. Those were the things that we should be consistent about. We should be unwavering about those things. And yet, what about how we lead? That's where flexibility comes in. So we need to, a pitfall for leaders is to assume or to over lean into the idea of, well, I've got to be consistent. I can't do it differently because I've got to do it the way people would be expecting from me. So I'm suggesting a really important idea for us is that we have two choices: to think about the world, think about our role as a leader as either or think about it as both and. And I just suggested to you that I believe that both and is the more effective answer for consistent and flexible. But before we're done, I think you're going to see that for more than just that. So think about it this way: both and leadership is that the test of an effective leader is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in our mind, consistent and flexible as an example, and apply each when needed. I'm suggesting that that will help us be a more effective leader, that both and leadership is, in fact, flexible leadership. And that it's a pitfall when we stay in either or thinking. And let's just be honest, either or thinking is a lot easier. Right? So it's easier to think about and lean into our habits. And it's easier to focus on either or thinking. And yet, neither are necessarily going to get us better results. Two pitfalls. Pitfall number 3 is what I call the reasoning pitfall. Now, we should be able to build our reasoning skills. I'm going to take you back to school at some point here. In the chat, yes or no, you've heard of deductive reasoning. I'm guessing you have. In fact, you probably even tell me what it is, but I'm going to give you a reminder of it. What is deductive reasoning? Now, this is just letting me see that you guys are actually hanging out with me, okay? So let's talk about what deductive reasoning is, okay? Here's deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is based on rules. So if the rule is that Valentine's Day is on February the 14th, that's a rule. So then we can know that what? If it's the 14th of February, it is Valentine's Day. That's deductive reasoning. There's a general rule, and from that we can draw a specific conclusion. That's all deductive reasoning is. If you didn't remember that from school or got confused about that, don't worry about it, because we all do this all day long. There's a general rule from which we draw a specific conclusion. Okay, that's deductive reasoning. The second type of reasoning is inductive reasoning. Well, what's inductive reasoning? Inductive reasoning is, it starts not with a rule, but with an observation. I saw this happen. Okay. And then some things start to come after that, right? So Let's just say this. Let's just say that you find out or note that there's a problem with your website. And from that, after that, you start getting a lot more calls with questions or issues than you were getting before. And that observation about the website would lead us to a general conclusion that perhaps the reason we're getting more calls is because the website is down. Right? Inductive reasoning makes sense. And you're saying, Kevin, where's the pitfall here? These both seem pretty logical. We do both of these things all the time. Now I'm going to give you a third type of reasoning, and I'm guessing this one you may not have heard of. I get my slides to move. There we go. It's called abductive reasoning. And you may say, that's a strange word, Kevin. What does this one mean? Let's explore this one. So this is incomplete observations lead us to a prediction or a guess. Okay. Jackie, I don't know why you can't see the slides. I'm assuming others can. So someone please tell me if you can see the slides, just to make sure that we don't have an overall problem. Okay, cool. So I'm sorry about that, Jackie. And I don't know if I can help at this point. Maybe make the screen bigger. Maybe that would help. Okay, so here's the deal about abductive reasoning. We're making guesses because we have an observation, but we know that our observation is probably incomplete. So since we don't have all of the data, we make some guesses. I call this plausible cause analysis. What are plausible things that could happen that we could then make a guess as to what we could do next? Okay, it's a pretty useful way to think about this, right? So here's the thing. I want you to look at all three of these again. I'm going to put them back up here, giving you all of the, whoops, one slide too many. Let's go back here. There we go. So we got deductive reasoning, general rule to specific conclusion. Inductive reasoning, specific observation to general conclusion. And abductive reasoning, incomplete observations, which leads to a prediction or a guess. Now, here's my question for you. How often now, are there general rules that we find in life and at work? Sure. Are there often situations where the general rule might be a starting point, but we have an awful lot of things that it depends on? Like, how often a day do you say to yourself, well, it depends? Every time you say it depends, you are saying, well, the general rule might not apply here. And how many times do you make an observation and from that single observation come to a conclusion when it wouldn't take much to realize that perhaps my single observation, my perspective isn't a complete and total 360-degree 2020 vision picture of the world? So what I would suggest to you is that the world that we live in, the world that we work in, and the world that we lead in is much more a world where we have incomplete observations. This doesn't mean that our observations are incorrect, they're just incomplete. Which means I would propose to you that we have to think about how can we improve our odds based on our guesses or our predictions, and that's a far more common way of which we live and work than we often want to give credit for. And guess what else? We said that moving beyond our habits is harder. And we said that moving beyond either or thinking is harder. And guess what? Moving beyond deductive and inductive reasoning is also harder. So I'm suggesting to you that the pitfalls all are things where we, knowingly or not, end up leaning into what we are more comfortable with, what we know, what we've already done, and ultimately what's easier. Now, I use the word playbook in the title, right? So I'm going to bring up, and Norma says we are unlikely to ever have complete information, which is a true statement, right? So we have to realize that there's probably always at least a little bit of stuff we don't know. In some cases, I would propose, more on this in a second, there are there are at least some things where we could get pretty close to complete information when we include other people on our team, right? That's not even always true. But while we will almost never have complete information, there may be situations where we can get pretty close to it by bringing others into the conversation. So the idea of a playbook comes from sports, right? And so I'm not going to belabor the sports analogy, but I'm going to put this up here, right? And say to you that this is a playbook from my favorite sport. And in certain situations, the plays say, here's what each person is going to do in order for us to hopefully have greater success. Without a playbook, everyone just does whatever they want. And pretty much, if I get the ball, I might just keep the ball and I might dribble and try to get a shot myself. Not necessarily the play we would want to run, and yet might be what my natural inclination is, might be what my habit is, might be what I like, might not get us the best result. So why do we need a playbook? Well, we need a playbook because with situational awareness, then we can make some choices about what we could do. What are our options in that situation? And what our pitfalls tell us is that a playbook will give us some place to work on and move past those either or, faulty reasoning, and habitual responses. So it can help us to avoid or overcome habit by giving us a conscious way to think about what can we do now that might help us be more successful and not have to figure it out in the moment of frustration or disillusionment or discouragement or complexity, but rather to say, when we find this situation, here's something we could try. So that's the idea of a playbook that I want to give you. So the first thing about a playbook is situational analysis. You look at this picture here, and again, I think this will be the last thing I will say about sports. But at the top of it, it says man-to-man plays. If you're playing against a man-to-man defense, these are some things you could try. Situational. Okay. So if you were on the webinar we did a few weeks ago, you may remember this particular slide. Whoops. I can get myself to stay. There we go. This particular slide. I gave you the mental picture. I'm going to give the mental picture to you again. If I put you into the wilderness and said, I want you to get out, the first thing you'd want is a map. So you'd have some idea of where I'm at, because if I know where I'm at, then I know what I might need to do, which direction I might need to go, what I might need to try if I want to be more successful, right? So what I want to do is give you a map, and we're going to talk about it very simply right now, and I'm going to give you some very simple ideas about how to deal with this map. This map is called the Cynefin framework. So that word does not look like it should be pronounced Cynefin, but trust me, it is. And no, I did not make it up. It's a Welsh word that helps us understand about where we are, right? Cynefin. It rhymes with Kevin, everybody. There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Marlene. So the Cynefin framework was developed by a really smart guy named Dave Snowden. And basically, at the highest level, what this says is, if we understand what our situation is like, we have a better chance of deciding what we ought to do. And so I'm going to talk about this very quickly and hopefully somewhat simply. And then I'm going to give you some important ideas to consider. Okay, so here's the thing. A clear context. We know what's happening. We know what the cause and effects of the situation are. Someone can make a decision with a good amount of knowledge, maybe not perfect and complete information, but pretty darn close. It's simple, it's clear, it's known, best practices will work. Awesome. Clear context. Complicated context. Maybe together we can, or with some expert input, we can have enough information about the cause and effect. It's relatively ordered kind of thing. Like if we know all the components, we can probably come up with a plan of attack for it. Probably one person doesn't have all that, and we might have to work on figuring that out a little bit. And it's not quite as clear. It's complicated. Well, then there's complex, where there are things we not only do we not have complete information, we probably can't get complete information. We really need to do more guessing and predicting and trying and testing, because there are things we don't know, and there are things we don't know we don't know. And so, doesn't that describe a lot of your work right there? And then the last one is the chaotic thing, a chaotic situation, which Snowden would tell us, and I would agree, that doesn't happen as often as we'd like to think. More on that in a second. But it's where things are truly there. We really have no idea what's going on. The example that I've been using with people is, imagine you live on the Gulf Coast of the United States, and or in Jamaica, I suppose, and you work at some sort of a plant, and there's a hurricane coming, but there's so many things we don't know. When will it land? Where will it land? Where it lands will have an impact on how we will be impacted, and on and on and on. And in a chaotic situation, we literally don't know, but we need to do something. So that's a very simple, high level look at this framework. So I'm going to give you a couple of things to hook onto that might help you with it a little bit. Situational analysis, if you will. So if we think about it this way, the things on the right-hand side, clear and complicated, are ordered. We can figure out most of the pieces, or pretty much all the pieces. And if we can think about it like a car, like I can't, but some people could take a car or a part of the car all apart, and they can put it all back together. There's an order, there's a plan, and they can put it back together if they have the right skill set, and it'll work the way it did before you took it apart. It's ordered. Unordered, think about mayonnaise. Like, once you put it together, you're not taking it back apart. Now, I will tell you that we had a jar of mayonnaise in our garage in an extra pantry space, and Lori took it out the other day, and it had separated. And so, but she could stir it up a little bit and get it mostly back to where it was, but she was never going to be able to take it all the way back to the components, right? So it's unordered. Okay, so if you think about so there's just a rule of thumb. If the situation, if we can pull it apart and put it back together mentally, it's probably on the right-hand side. If not so much, if the situation you're facing looks a little bit more like mayonnaise, if it's unordered, you're probably on the left side. Okay. And here's the thing. We can also look at it up and down, right? And I would suggest to you that most of us, most of the time, in part because of the pitfalls we've just uncovered, is that we act as if we're in clear context. We know, we think we know, we have a best practice, we'll try it again. That's what our habits say. I've seen this before, so this is probably what's going to work. And yet, how often have you been in a situation where after it was over and the dominoes fell in different directions, then you could kind of go backwards and say, I sort of see how we got here, but we never could have figured that out to start with. If that was the case, then it wasn't clear. It was probably a complex context. Okay. Now, one more thing about this. So I would say this, that the more we go up on this framework, everybody, the more likely that we cannot do it alone. That we don't have all the information. We don't have all of the inputs. We don't have all the perspectives. We don't have all the experiences. We don't have all of the inputs. And so the more we realize that, hey, this is further up, the more we have to think about this collectively rather than individually. Playbook kind of thinking, right? One more thing. You may have never seen this framework before. Now that I'm starting to describe it to you, I think you will start to see it all over in your world. You'll start to notice, yeah, this is a complex situation, right? But here's what happens. One of two things, and I've hinted at part of this, but not all of it, that what we tend to do is believe that most everything is either clear or chaotic. In fact, a lot of people will say that the world is chaotic, right? And in fact, a lot of language gets used to say, well, we're in a state of chaos. And I would suggest to you that many times when we think it's chaos, it's really complex. And if we treat it as chaos, where we make a decision, then that may not get us even close to the kinds of results that we need because we don't have all the information. Are there times when things are chaotic? Yes, far less likely than we might think. And are there times where situations are clear? For sure, but not as many times as it used to be. And so the world is moving up on this framework. Generally speaking, all four of these are still situations, a context that we will find ourselves in. But the mistake that many leaders make is they assume too many of them to be either chaotic or clear, to our detriment. Okay. Where I would lead you to with all of this is to say that context matters a lot. On the playbook slide, I said we need to be able to have situational awareness. Having situational awareness means we have some clue about the context in which we are working. And I would simply say this: context makes us smarter, a lot smarter. So if we have a playbook that helps us think about, okay, what's the context of our situation? Then what plays can we run to be more effective in that situation? It's late in the game. What do we need to do? The situation is complex. What do we need to do? We're missing two people because they're on vacation. Now, what do we need to do? We could go on and on with the examples. And so the idea then is we need situational awareness before we can determine the options for the plays that we want to run. So in the book, Flexible Leadership, I talk about what's called the flexible leadership approach. But for this webinar, I'm going to call it the Flexible Leadership Playbook to stay with our theme, right? So I would suggest to you that that means intention plus context plus flexors. Now, we have unpacked a little bit about intention. I've suggested to you that we must move beyond our natural inclination, our habits. We must move beyond either or thinking. We must move beyond thinking about everything sort of in a deductive reasoning sort of way. So that means that we come to situations with some intention to move beyond automatic responses. And it means that we need to look at the context as we've just been talking about. So far we've talked about intention and context. So we're going to talk about this idea of flexors. But before I go on to those, I really want to see what questions, ideas, comments that you have at this point. So I'm going to take a breath and see what you got to say by telling me something in the chat if you want me to say more about, ask a question about, comment on, etc. And then we're going to get into these flexors and start to think about the plays that we can run. And as we look at some of those, I think that you'll have some thoughts to share or some questions to ask as well. But anything so far, anybody? So if you're good and it feels pretty clear to you, just tell me yes in the chat. And then there we got some. Okay. Would these plays be pretty similar across organizations or across industries? I think here's how I would. Now I've got to scroll back up all the yeses, but I want to answer that question because it's a really good one. Okay. So I would say that I'm going to give you some things to help you think about what your play options can be. And they absolutely can be similar across organizations, across industries, because ultimately what these are about, Gene, are thinking about this for ourselves as leaders with our folks, right? The human dynamics, the group dynamics, the situation that we face. And even though there are differences across industries for sure, things are far more the same than different, right? Laura says she thinks the point of context making us smarter is a great one. And listen, or I'll take anything I can get to help me be smarter. And so I have come to believe that to be true. What is the line about context and IQ points? Wayne asked. There's a line that I couldn't put it in the book because I couldn't come up with a definitive source, but the line is context is worth 80 IQ points, which I love. But because I can't officially attribute it to anybody for sure, I'm just saying that context makes us a lot smarter. So it's the same idea. But yeah, the idea is that context is worth 80 IQ points. And think about it. How often, like after something happens with 2020 hindsight, you can say, well, this is what I would have done now, right? Jesse says, our department is going through huge changes and tons of uncertainty. Looking forward to reading the book and learning tons to help us all navigate it. That's why we need a playbook, right? That's why we need to have a way to navigate. So are there handouts? Craig asks. On a later slide, we will tell you how you can get the slides. So there's not a handout per se, but the slides are available in PDF. And hang with us, Craig, because we'll show you how to get that in a little bit, right? Yeah, Gene says we have so many young leaders that have no training on how to be a leader, so this will help. I love that. Oh, I don't love that you have young leaders that have no training, but I love that you see that this may be helpful. Okay, so let's talk about some flexors. In the book, we go in a great deal on 19 flexors, but we're going to just talk about 4 of them here to give you an idea and to start to think about how you can build your playbook from right where we are today. So here's one. I picked 2 of what I call the big picture flexors, like we're big picture situational, and 2 that are what I call the everyday ones. So stuff you're going to run into all day long, all the time. So here's the first one. Now, remember, we talked about this earlier. We talked about both and, not either or. So the idea of a flexor is the best choice for us in almost every case will not be at the ends of these flexors, but somewhere in the middle. Now, if we have, as leaders, focused largely on either or thinking and are based on our habits, it's very likely that we have gravitated ourselves intellectually, habitually, in the direction of one or the others of these. So while maybe we're not all the way at the ends of one of these, at one of these ends, we are closer to an end than otherwise. And we're not allowing ourselves by that to think about what we might need to adjust or shift. So what do I mean by the customer team member flexor? Customer side, the customer is always right. Like we are in business to serve our customer. Our customer writes our paycheck. We got to treat our customer like gold because that's why we're here. Team member side, we can't achieve anything without our team. Got to have our team. I, as a leader, need to be focused on my team. We have highly successful organizations that have statements and cultures that are based on one end of this or the other. And they're successful because they've made it really clear exactly what that means. But what do most of us do? We lean one way, or we're at one end of this or the other. And what is the situation might tell us something different. Like if we're always on the team member side and we're not really thinking about our customers, that could be a problem, right? And if our customers are abusing in some way our team members, if they are taking advantage of our team members, if they are making life really, really difficult for our team members, should we be acknowledging that too? And I would say the answer is yes. So where should we be here? Somewhere in the middle based on the situation we find ourselves in. Do we need to lean one way or another based on how successful our business is in the short term? Maybe. Do we need to lean one way or the other based on what's happening culturally in our organization? Maybe. So it's about thinking about what is the situation that we face and which direction should we lean? Not this is how I lead or this is how I lead, but where should I be? What's the play that I should call now based on this situation? And how do I think that through for myself? having a way to think about that can make all the difference. Okay. So this is a big picture, Flexor, customer, employee, if you want to think about it that way. Where do you fall? And how is that impacting the decisions you're making and the results that you're getting? Right. So back to the earlier question, it could very well be that you would need to you would want to understand where your organization is on this one and take that into account when you're making those individual decisions for you as a leader. That context could be useful, important even. Okay. If your organizational context is super clear. Okay. Second one, I'm guessing this one will resonate with some of you. Well, we need to go slow to make sure we get it right. We need to make sure that we are diligent and we've taken care of all of the decisions to make sure that what we do is exactly the right answer. But listen, we need to have a sense of urgency. Like we need to get stuff done, and done is better than perfect. And we need to get something done. We need to make progress. We got to momentum comes from making progress and taking action. Right? Our value is hustle, and now we have a low quality of work. And so, Gene, that's exactly it, right? Like, is there anything wrong with hustle? No, until it becomes rushing, right? Laura says I have trouble helping my team find the middle ground, and I would suggest to you it depends on the situation. So let's go back and say, like, if the context of what we have is complex, if we go back and think about the framework, upper left, if the context is complex, then we need to test stuff. We need to try stuff. And it's probably okay to try some stuff and maybe move a little faster and 80-20 because we don't even know yet what's going to work. We're making guesses. We're predicting. We're trying. On the other hand, if we have clear best practices, we have a process that we know if we follow it, if the context is clear, then we ought to be able to be thinking about, not to be inaccurate, but should be able to move faster in that context, right? So all of us have a predisposition in one direction, this or the other. And so the first thing we have to do is understand, thank you, we have to understand that for ourselves, because we can't help our teams, Laura, if we're not clear about this for ourselves. Right? And my team would probably say, well, Kevin leans to the fast side. And yet I've worked really hard to not go so far that way, to be seen as impatient. And yet sometimes the team would say, I'm trying to move us that way, hopefully for good reason based on our context. So the idea here is, what does the situation tell us? And then which direction should we lean? Not which direction do we like? Not which is the one that we're most comfortable in, but which is the direction, which is the play that we need to call that will get us the better results right now. Okay. Fast versus slow. So those two are sort of big picture. I've got two more I need to share with you. And so let me go on to what we'll call the withhold and share flexor. Have you ever wondered as a leader, like, what information should I share or what information should I withhold? Like sometimes there are some leaders who lean into withholding every day, Jesse says. I need to withhold this because I don't know what they'll do with it. I need to withhold this because I'm not sure I trust them. I need to withhold this until I have all the information. So when I share it, I can be 100% accurate with it. Maybe even I need to withhold this so I can keep a little power. It's a little bit about how it allows me to lead, because I'm able to keep power because information is power. And so I'm withholding. And maybe I'd like to share, but I don't even know how to share. Or maybe I'm someone who I'm going to share. I'm an open book. I'm going to share everything when I can. Now, I would suggest that everything else being equal, leaning that direction might be to our advantage more times than not, in part because so many leaders for so long have leaned the other direction to the withhold side. And yet there are times when we need to withhold information, that sharing it with people right now is going to cause consternation, worry, and anxiety that there's nothing that they can do about it. And I don't have enough information yet to even help them all the way through it. So maybe I would be better to withhold, even if my predisposition would be to share. So Jesse's talking a little bit about the situation when she feels the need to do something, but gets given different information from above. And I would say this, that's a dilemma that you might very well face. And I see that other people are agreeing in some way with that. And I think the last word, Jesse, is the key one. Like, I would encourage you to ask the why. Help me understand why. If the only reason people have is that they would withhold, then you can, I think you have a different conversation. Then if they have a reason why, they might have a perspective you don't have. They might see, hey, this situation is more complex than you realize, or more complicated than you realize, and so we need to wait for these reasons. And I'm guessing if you can get answer to the why, even if you don't love the answer, at least you'll understand the answer. So my advice would be, when you don't get the explanation of why, don't be a pest, but be curious and try to understand, because that gives you what? More context, right? It gives you more context. So the fourth of the flexors, another set of the plays that we can run, relate to the details in the big picture, right? Some leaders want to get in the weeds. They need to know all of the last things, right? I need to know all of the details. I've got to have all of it. Sometimes we would be better served, though, to just know the big picture. Guess what? Who is almost assuredly going to have a lot of the details? The team, because they're doing the work. If all of us, including we as a leader, lean into the details, guess what's probably missing? The big picture. And guess what our team may need? The big picture. And sometimes we don't need to be in the details yet. We just need to be in the big picture so we can see the context. We can see the situation. I often talk to leaders about the fact that if we don't see the big picture, who will? Now, I'm not saying, though, that means that we should never know the details. I could tell you lots of stories about how Kevin has messed this up with some of the people on this call by thinking he knew the details or trying to get into the details he didn't need to get into. He'd have been better off staying out of them. I'm not saying that doesn't mean I should have any of them. Doesn't mean I need to go all the way over here. But I also don't need to be all the way over here. Yeah. There are two big pictures, the customers and the businesses, 100%. And we need to know both. And sometimes those are at odds. Sometimes those things, John, are in tension, which takes us back to the both and thing. And I love that you said and not or, right? Like, doing this work of leading is challenging, which is why we need a playbook. The thing about a playbook is the team can review the playbook or think about that when they need to, rather than trying to create it on the fly. And so one of the big ideas of the flexible leadership approach is to have a toolkit to help you create the plays when you don't need them in that instant, so that when you need them, you can lean in a direction much more effective at that time. Okay. All right. So how do we make this playbook work? Right. Well, three things. We need three things to make this playbook work. The first thing we need is a mindset. And we talked a little bit about that. The pitfalls are the things that we talked about, are the things that could be in the way of helping us build the skill set that we need. And it's one thing to have skills, but another thing to practice them, just called habit set. So mindset, skill set, habit set. Some of you have heard me say those three words before. How do they relate to what we're talking about today? Well, the mindset says we need a playbook. The skill set says, here's what's in the playbook. And the habit set is practicing the playbook. Practicing the playbook. And if you get my daily email every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, tomorrow you will see me, you will read that I'm writing a little bit about consciously practicing and how we think about practicing, even when things are habitual. And how do we practice moving past the habitual? So habit set is where I want to spend a minute on, because it doesn't matter if you get the mindset and skill set right. If you don't apply it, it won't matter. Nothing's going to change, right? So let's talk about habit set just for a second. I would say this: we need to start small. You may have gotten a lot of ideas from this, and so you just got to pick a spot to start. Maybe one of those flexors really resonated for you. Where do I start with one of those things? And I would say this: look for those things where, and I said this earlier, where you say to yourself, well, it depends. Because if the minute that you know that it depends, and I don't really know, I don't really have all the information at this moment, so I need to explore those depends a bit. Once we stop ourselves with it depends, we're willing now and we're able to move out of habit into, well, what play should I run here given this situation? Let me explore those different depending situations so I can decide what might be a better choice using my playbook to help me do that. And lastly, you need to have support. Like, doing this alone is hard, right? More about that in a second as well. So I have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. I've tried to take them as we've gone. Does anybody have a question, a comment, something else you want me to clarify, or you want to ask me before we continue? Anybody? Well, I'm going to give you a second to keep typing, and I'm going to say what I promised, which is if you want the slides, here's what you got to do. Send an email to Marlene. She's going to probably put her email address in the chat as well. There it is. So you can copy it and paste it. If you want the slides, PDF version of the slides, send her an email. She'll make sure, or we ultimately will make sure that you get them, and we're happy to share them with you, right? So any questions before I continue? Anything at all? All right. So, well, how do we get there? How do we get there to the use of this playbook thing? And so, two questions, as I said from the beginning: individual hat, organizational hat, right? So how do we get there individually? Well, we have to think mindset, skill set, habit set. And we have to recognize that those mental pitfalls, that mindset stuff could be getting in our way. So we have to say, understand why it's important that I make some adjustment, and then make a decision to do it, and then use a playbook. Build your playbook. I've given you some ideas of how you can start to build your playbook. The book gives you more ideas about it. And we have to recognize that doing this is not intuitive or natural, because it's saying we got to go past our natural inclination, our natural responses. So how do we get there organizationally? How do you counter that the other team also has a playbook? I don't know. And now, Norma, that makes me think a little bit about the sports analogy. Let me just say this, that if I know that the other team has a playbook, if I'm going to take the sports analogy, that's part of my context, right? I need to take that into account when I decide what I'm going to do, how I'm going to lead. I would suggest this, so that also ties to my next slide, which is how do we get there organizationally? That organizationally, the more we can have all of our leaders using the same playbook, the more successful we will be. Right. And so organizationally, we have to, again, think mindset, skill set, habit set, which means that we have to help people figure out the mindset, because without that, the skill set won't matter. And if we build the skill set, but don't get people to practice it and build a new habit set, it won't make any difference either. So we have to help people see why that matters, like I tried to do at the start of our time today in a very short time. And then we can start to build and use the same playbook across our team, across our organization. And so if organizationally you have leadership development efforts, I'm sure many of you do, then you can start to think about how can we implement or incorporate this into what we're doing? Or if we're not doing anything around leadership development, how could we use this as our starting point? Or how do we connect the dots between what we're already doing and this? Okay. So I've mentioned a couple of times that this new book contains a lot more about this idea of the playbook. I've sprinkled a few things from it into the last 55 minutes. So how do we get started in terms of using this? Well, I would say this, number one, that I suggest that if you came here thinking about this situation for yourself individually, I'm going to suggest that you buy 2 books. And I am not saying that because I want to sell books. Well, yes, I do want to sell books. But what I really want is for this book to help leaders be more effective. And so that's why I think you should buy 2. Here's why. Because if you go into this with a partner and you're reading it together and you're practicing the skills together and you have an accountability partner and a thinking partner, guess what? The chances of you building a playbook that you will actually use goes way, way up. And so while that is a good reason to do that, guess what else? We're going to give both people, if you buy 2 copies, both people are going to get access to our March 25 virtual LeaderCon event, full day event with 7 experts joining me, including Dave Snowden, who built the Cynefin framework that we talked about. And you'll get access, whether you can join us on March 25th or not, you'll get full access to the recordings, the transcripts, and everything else from that event. If you've ever been to Virtual LeaderCon, and just tell us in the chat, yes, you've been. And this is going to be a one-day event focused around the ideas in this book with other experts joining us. I can't wait for it. It's going to be fantastic. You buy 2 books, guess what? You'll both get access to all the stuff beyond the day. Okay. So maybe you're thinking about this organizationally. You got a few leaders in your organization, or you want to just get started, start to build this in your organization. Oh, by the way, there's where you go. KevinEikenberry.com/buy2. That's how you can do that. And it'll get you all set up, takes you through the process to get the virtual LeaderCon and all that stuff. But what about if you want to buy books for a team? For a few leaders in your organization, you want to buy 10 books. $260, get you 10 books, right? And which is $4 a piece off of the list price. And you're going to get all that VLC stuff for all of your people, all 10 of you. And you're going to get a book club guide. So if you got 10 leaders, you might want to do a book club. And so we got a discussion guide that we built that is available once you have the book. And so we're going to give that to you if you buy 3 to 10 copies. And there you go, KevinEikenberry.com/buy10, or I'll put that QR code back up in a second again as well. But if you're thinking that you're thinking bigger than this, like Kevin, we got a lot of leaders in our organization. We got more than 10 leaders. We want to do something there. Well, you want to think about books for your organization? We can help you with that too. So I'm just going to put these 3 things up there. So the more books you buy, the more stuff you get. Simple as that. So if you buy 11 or more books, really, if you buy 100 books and if you don't need them all, we have a not-for-profit that we're helping teachers across the country use this to build their skills, teach and lead in their communities and with their schools. That you'll get all the stuff we've already talked about, plus you'll also get a 30-day flexible leadership challenge that we're doing in late April and beyond that will help you build those skills over 30 days in a cohort of folks. It's going to be super fantastic. If you go to the link that I'm about to give you here, you can learn more about, click the link to learn more about that. If you buy 500 books, I'll do a free webinar for you. If you buy 1,000 books, I'll do a keynote in your organization, and all it's going to cost you is my travel. So the more you buy, the more value you get for every person in your organization that gets a book. That's just how it works. And so that's how you can get started. And so all of the links Marlene has put into the chat, so you can go to KevinEikenberry.com/flexible or dial that phone number and we'll help you get all set up as well with those larger purchases. So the question is, do you have the playbook to succeed in changing in uncertain times? And I believe this book, some of you have known me for a while, and I will tell, and have maybe read some of my other books. I will simply tell you this: this is my best work to date. I think it's the work that can have the biggest impact on organizations. I can't wait for it to be out into the world Here's what a couple of the people that read it ahead of time have said about it. In a time when authentic leadership is more crucial than ever, flexible leadership offers a timely and refreshing approach. It is an essential guide to help you be those ready to lead with clarity, adaptability, and purpose. If you're looking for a roadmap to elevate your leadership journey, this is exactly the guide you need. If that's you, if that's leaders in your organization, man, we'd love to help you. And here's all the ways that you can get the book. They're all in the chat. They're all right here. Okay. Which of our other books would help? So, Gene, I'm going to make sure that whoever on our team is going to be connected with you follows up with you on that. But it really does depend on what your organizational needs are. If you've got young leaders, like you said earlier, moved up from the organization to being a first-time leader, frontline leader, our Bud to Boss book might be one of the best as well there. So, and others, if you've got a lot of folks in leading at a distance, the long distance leader might be what you need, etc. So, thank you for that, Laura. So here's the thing. Now's the time. If you don't take action, here's the March 25th is coming. That's the day the book launches. That's the day of virtual LeaderCon. And I'll be honest with you, the more books that we can sell, the more momentum we can get ahead of time, the faster you can help your leaders and you can help yourself, and the faster we can build momentum in organizations and with book sales. So I'm super excited that almost all of you stayed until right now. I'm thrilled if you would choose to take us up on one of these offers. And we look forward to having you join us. If you do, when you do, to me seeing you as I sit in this very chair in just about 3 weeks. And we do 3 weeks from today when we do virtual LeaderCon. So thank you all so much for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you. I wish you the very best. I mostly what I hope is that you take some action. And by taking some action, you have the chance to make a difference. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.